How is the recovery progressing? We like to call it not economic recovery, we're calling it the grand reopening of the U.S. economy. And there's several factors that are driving this recovery, but first of all, it's important for investors to understand that just 1 year ago, we were posting the worst quarters of economic growth in U.S. history. Here we are 1 year later, and we're going to surpass that pre-pandemic peak in GDP. So what are some of the driving forces behind economic growth right now? Well, the biggest elephant in the room is stimulus, both from the fiscal side and the monetary side. From the fiscal side, we're seeing more than $5 trillion thus far being put into the U.S. economy just to combat the virus. Let's put that in perspective. If you look at this chart, this shows you that if you were to add up on an inflation-adjusted basis, all of the money spent on World War II, World War I, the Vietnam War, and the Korean War, we have spent more money just to combat COVID in all four of those combined. The manufacturing sector has been another huge component to this economic recovery. That's because the economy was shut down for a period of time last year. So there are a significant amount of bottlenecks that need to be worked through, and now inventories that need to be rebuilt. If you look at the next chart, you can see that the customer inventories in the manufacturing sector are at a record low. But the backlog of orders, those orders that haven't even been filled yet, they're also at a record high. So the manufacturing sector is running extremely solid and should continue to support economic growth. Consumers are another huge driving force in the economic recovery. Consumers want to get out. They want to spend money. And what they've done over the past year is really work to repair their balance sheets. Not only is the household debt service ratio at a record low because they've used money to pay down debt, but you also have a personal savings rate that's in the double digits because they've saved money. So they're ready to get out and they're ready to spend. And what you can see in these four charts is that we're seeing this demand from the consumers starting to recover. You can see that air travel is recovering again. You're seeing that Google searches for things like VRBO or Airbnb, which are lodging travel sites, these are turning higher. You're seeing people going back out to restaurants, and then you're also seeing people driving more. This is all tied into this pent-up consumer demand that we think is going to continue through the second half of this year and also into 2022. Even though the economic outlook looks very promising, there's always risks that you should be monitoring. The first one is inflation. And if you look at this chart, it really illustrates how inflation may be different this time. The blue line is your M2 money supply. So this is the amount of money that's circulating out in the economy. When you look at the change in the money supply on a year-over-year basis, it's growing over 20%. Now, back in 2008, everyone had thought that because of the stimulus we implemented then, we'd see a significant amount of inflation. We never did. Part of that's because that stimulus was used to shore up the banks. But also, if you look at this chart, you can see that that stimulus was a small blip on the money supply radar. What you see now is a significant rise in the money supply. So this does have inflation implications. It's a question of when, not necessarily if. The second risk is rising interest rates. Rising interest rates can be positive for savers, but it can also be negative for those people that are leveraged or take out a significant amount of debt. One of the biggest culprits of taking out a significant amount of debt right now is the U.S. government. And you can see by this chart, this is showing you the net interest that the U.S. government needs to pay on their debt. They've been able to float a significant amount of debt for a long time because we've had such low interest rates. But interest rates are rising. And what you're seeing is that net interest as a percent of what the government, all of their outlays, is starting to rise. So this is something, this really illustrates how rising interest rates can create some damage and risk to certain areas of the economy. One of the other risks that we're monitoring is the labor market. We have seen some phenomenal numbers now that we're seeing the economy reopen in regards to job creation. However, the pandemic did create a disproportionate effect on certain jobs, low-paying jobs. Women have left the labor force. Minorities have been impacted. So there's been a disproportionate effect on the labor market and how it's recovering as well. we actually still have over 4 million Americans that are considered long-term unemployed. Now, while we feel confident that as the economy reopens, that this will continue to repair, it is a risk that we're monitoring for a couple reasons. Those people that left the labor force, we need them to come back. And then second of all, if Americans use the stimulus as a supplement instead of going out to look for work, then you will have people just sitting on the sideline longer than is necessary.